So for those of you who panic bought flour in the hopes of learning how to make your own bread, I'm going to give you a quick tutorial today on how to do it. In essence, you only really need 3 ingredients with bread. You need flour, strong white bread flour, which has a high proportion of gluten in, that makes it nice and springy and doughy. So in here I've got 500 grams, half strong white bread flour and half spelt flour. The next thing you need really is yeast. We have fast action yeast here. I have 8 grams to go with my 500 grams of flour. Got a bit of sugar, you don't need it, but I like it. And we've got 10 grams of salt. Salt's very important because it makes the bread taste nice. And in the jug I've got a mixture of milk and water up to about 320 ml. You can just use water, but I add milk because it gives it a softer texture. So just to recap, you need 500 grams of bread flour, this could be mixed, 8 grams of fast action yeast, 10 grams of salt, 1 tablespoon of caster sugar, though that's optional, and 320 to 350 ml of water and or milk. So first thing I'm going to do is just mix up the 2 different flours I have in there, and then going to add the yeast, just scatter it over, and the sugar. Sugar's going to feed the yeast, and then going to mix them about, get them nicely distributed. And then I'll add the salt. I don't add the salt straight on top of the yeast because salt actually inhibits yeast. It means it won't rise as well. Give it a mix around, get a spoon, and then you want to add the milk, water, your liquid, all in one go pretty much. I add about 3/4 and then leave another quarter just to make sure that it's nice and doughy or that I don't make it too wet. So it looks a little bit dry. A bit dry bits down the bottom. So I'm going to add the rest of it, and I'm probably going to need a little bit more as well. I do, so I'm going to get a little bit of water. So flour the work surface. Once you get a nice wet dough, it's always better to make a dough slightly wetter than it is dry, because you can always add a bit more flour, you can't add more water really. Then we get to kneading part. We're going to knead in a heart-shaped pattern, that's why I've drawn a little heart there. We're going to knead with both hands. A lot of people just knead with one hand, we're going to knead with both. So you're going to use the heel of your palms, heel of your hands. You don't want to squeeze it through your fingertips because then it'll get stuck quite easily, because this is quite a wet one. Yeah, you can see you can use the palms. Keep it clear of the fingers. So push away with your hand and then pull back. And you see, we're kneading in a heart-shaped pattern. So you've got to continue doing that for quite a while. This is going to take about 10 minutes. You're going to be distributing the yeast and the salt and the sugar all in there, and you're going to be working the gluten. So we get that nice springy dough. That's going to make a really fluffy bread. Give it a prod. It still looks a bit wet, and what I'm looking for when I'm prodding it is a bounce back. So if you prod it, the dough should come back out. As you can see, my hands are really clean, which is what you want. You don't want loads of doughy mess all over your hands. If it is really wet, then you can just add a bit more flour until it's the right consistency. But you don't need to keep adding flour. It eventually will not stick to the work surface. Here I am, just shaping it into a nice little ball. Give it a pack, it's done well, good bread, and give it a poke. You can't really see from here, but when I was poking it, it was springing back out again. And that's what you're looking for. So roughly clean the bowl. You don't really need to, that's fine. Give it a drizzle of olive oil in there or rapeseed oil, doesn't really matter. And then in a minute my hand is going to come in here and it's going to, I've disappeared for a while, I don't know where I've gone. Oh, I'm back, here we go. So drizzle your oil around the edges. Yeah, pick your bread up, make it into a nice ball. I'm a bit obsessive about making it into a nice ball. Put it in your bowl. Pat it, it's done well, good bread, well done. Get a piece of cling film, or if you've got a plastic bag, you can just put the bowl inside the plastic bag. You want to loosely cover it, you don't want it too tight because this bread is going to breathe. That's effectively what the yeast is doing. So the reason it rises is because yeast is a living organism, as you can see here. Got a lovely time-lapse video going on. It's quite slow to start with, but you see it growing. What the yeast is doing is actually you've fed it, so you've given it flour and you've given it water and it's got a bit of sugar, so it's working. As a result, it's respiring and giving out carbon dioxide. To prep your tin, as I'm doing here, drizzle a bit of oil in, give it a brush around all around the edges. And then we're going to add a little bit of flour. A little bit of flour. Oh, and a bit more, I think. Wow, yeah, a bit more flour. Am I done with the flour? I'm done with the flour. Okay. Give it a tap around. Make sure it covers all of the edges, but especially the bottom 4 corners. That will be where your dough sticks. Yeah, I'm having fun with that. Yep, definitely having fun. I'm done. Cool, right. Oh, no, got to put the flour away. Not done. Okay, here's my dough. I'm just poking it. It's fun to poke. It should be pillowy soft. That's what you're looking for. You can see it's doubled in size. It was rising for about an hour and a half. So I floured the work surface. I'm taking it for a little drive around. What you're going to do is you're going to fold it. You don't want to knock too much of the air out at this point because you're folding it into shape anyway. And you don't really want to work it too much because it will come tough. So I've made it into a little Swiss roll by the looks of it. But I've just made it into an oblong by doing those folds, and now I've put it in its bread tin. So I'm going to leave it to rise for about half an hour, 45 minutes. You don't want it to double in size this time. You're only looking for a little rise. So here it is back. You can see it's now cresting over the top of the tin like it wasn't before. I'm just giving it a little poke. You want a delicate poke this time. I have a lame here, but it's a razor blade, but you can use a knife. We're going to go from one end down to the other. It's just to give it a split tin look. I'm then going to leave it to rise for another 10-15 minutes, and what you'll see is that the split has actually grown outwards, so it's still continuing its rise. I'm just poking it in its corners. If you poke it and it doesn't actually spring back out, then it's ready to go. So that's going to go in the oven. I do 15 minutes at 220. You can see it rise here. This is called oven spring. And then the second 15 minutes we'll do about 210. So it's out the oven here, and you're going to briefly hear it. It should sound hollow underneath. I'm actually just putting it back in just to give it another 5 minutes, but without its tin. Once it comes back out, I just stick it on a wire rack. You just want to make sure there's enough airflow underneath for it to cool down. I then stick a tea towel over the top. This just helps give a slightly softer crust, but if you're looking for something really crusty, then you don't need to do that at all. Try and resist breaking into it immediately, as it is continuing its cooking process as it cools. And there you have it, a split tin.